Welcome to Reform Thinking. I want to start by asking you to just picture something in your mind for a second. Picture a forgotten prisoner waking up in a dark, damp, subterranean dungeon.
Yeah, the air is heavy, smelling like stagnant water and decay.
Right. The walls are cold, unyielding stone. His ankles are bruised from the constant friction of bronze fetters. And he opens his eyes to the same miserable reality he has faced for years.
Just another bleak day in the pit.
But the thing is, he is entirely unaware that by sundown, he will hold the absolute command of the greatest empire of antiquity. I mean, he receives no warning.
Right, there is no gradual transition here, no transition team, no diplomatic onboarding, nothing.
Yeah. He literally goes to sleep a slave in iron chains, and he wakes up on the very day that the entire known world will be placed under his feet.
It is the absolute definition of a staggering historical reversal.
Yeah.
We see no political maneuvering involved here, no grassroots campaigning, no slow, methodical climbing of the corporate ladder.
Right. It's instant.
Yeah, we are looking at an immediate, total paradigm shift orchestrated entirely from the heavens. The sheer velocity of this change defies all human logic.
So the mission of our deep dive today is to dig into the notes and research you sent us regarding Genesis chapter 41, verses 38 through 45.
It's a huge text.
It really is. We are going to extract the raw, unvarnished theological truths about divine providence found in this specific text. Our goal is to show you, the listener, how the sudden exaltation of Joseph from a Hebrew slave to the ruler of Egypt exposes the absolute sovereignty of God over human suffering.
Right, over human suffering, over political regimes, and over all of redemptive history.
Yeah, so setting the table for you today, we will look at the historical realities of the Egyptian court, the original Hebrew text, and the breathtaking foreshadowing of Jesus Christ that the text presents.
And what stands out immediately in the sources is that we are not observing a simple historical curiosity here, or, an ancient fable about a local hero.
Right, it's much bigger than that.
Oh, absolutely. The research frames this as the meticulous craftsmanship of the Creator, as he molds a savior for the ancient world, securing the survival of his covenant people.
But before we look at the golden chariot, before we look at the fine linen and the royal signet ring, you must grasp the weight of the 13 years of silence that came first.
Yeah, that 13-year period is the necessary crucible. If we ignore the darkness of the pit, the brilliance of the palace loses its meaning. We are talking about a young man who experienced violent betrayal by his own brothers. He was sold like a piece of livestock to foreign Midianite traders.
Which is just horrific to even imagine.
It is. He endured the humiliation of the slave market in a strange land. He suffered the agonizing injustice of false accusations by Potiphar's wife. And then, he just rotted in a royal dungeon, completely forgotten by the cupbearer he had just helped.
Let's break down this sequence of events chronologically, because the timeline itself is heavy. He is 17 years old when his brothers strip him of his coat and throw him into a dry cistern in Dothan.
Right. 17, just a kid, really.
Yeah, and he is 30 years old when he finally stands before Pharaoh. That is 13 years of his prime youth gone.
Just completely erased in darkness.
So to a casual observer, or perhaps to a secular historian reviewing the data, Joseph's life looks like a tragic string of terrible luck, right? Salvaged at the very end by a fortunate coincidence of a dream.
Yeah, that's the secular read on it.
But looking at the theological framework in your notes, how should we actually read this 13-year timeline?
Well, we must frame these 13 years through a strict lens of divine providence. This aligns with the historical Reformed confessions, which argue that God did not simply react to the brothers' sin or to the lies of Potiphar's wife as if he were caught off guard.
Right. God is never caught off guard.
Never. The Lord unchangeably ordained the entire sequence. From all eternity, by the most wise and holy counsel of his own will, God freely and unchangeably ordained whatsoever comes to pass in Joseph's life.
So the pit was ordained.
Yes. The false accusation was ordained. The cupbearer's amnesia was ordained. The dungeon was not an accident. It was a divinely appointed crucible meant to prepare the vessel for the immense weight of the authority he was about to receive.
Wait, hold on. If I am looking at this from the outside, or if a skeptic is listening to this, a massive red flag goes up.
Oh, sure. I know where you're going with this.
Yeah, because how do we reconcile the sheer cruelty of the brothers or the wicked lies of Potiphar's wife with the holy decree of God? I mean, if God ordained the pit, how is God not the author of their sin?
That raises a crucial theological distinction regarding concurrentism,
Hmm.
which is the idea that God and human beings act concurrently, but on entirely different levels.
Okay, unpack that a bit for us.
We have to differentiate between the sinful intent of human beings and the holy, redemptive intent of God. Think of it like a master of Aikido, right? The martial art focused on redirecting momentum.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Yeah, so the Aikido master does not initiate the malicious strike. The attacker initiates the strike out of their own aggression and free will. But the master takes that uncoerced, hostile kinetic energy and perfectly redirects it to achieve their own total victory.
Wow, okay. So applied to Joseph's brothers.
The brothers acted out of genuine malice, envy, and hatred. They made real, uncoerced choices rooted in their own sinful natures. Potiphar's wife acted out of lust and spite,
Mm-hmm.
but God, in his infinite wisdom, governs those very same actions for the good of his covenant people.
So the brothers meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. The intent is what separates the guilt of man from the holiness of God.
That is precisely it. The same physical action occurs, but the motives are worlds apart. Man is executing his malice, while God is executing his salvation.
The human agents are entirely responsible for their wickedness, yet their wicked actions are the precise instruments God uses to maneuver Joseph into the exact position required to save the known world from starvation.
Yes, and the dungeon strips away all self-reliance. Joseph is reduced to absolute dependence.
Because he has nothing left.
Nothing. He has no family name to leverage in Egypt, no wealth to bribe his way out of the royal prison, no legal representation to appeal his case. He is stripped down to nothing but the presence of the Lord.
And it is only when the preparation in the dark is complete that the light breaks in. Which brings us right to the specific moment when human intellect hits a brick wall in the throne room of Pharaoh.
Oh, it's such an incredible scene.
It really is. If the dungeon strips away self-reliance, then Pharaoh's court is the ultimate test of what replaced it. So, who is Pharaoh in this specific historical context? Because your notes suggest we are likely looking at the Middle Kingdom of Egypt, or perhaps the Hyksos period.
Yeah, the Hyksos period is particularly relevant here. The Hyksos were a Semitic people who had infiltrated and taken over Lower Egypt.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so if this pharaoh is indeed a Hyksos ruler, it explains a great deal about why he would be open to elevating a fellow Semite like Joseph.
That makes perfect sense historically.
It does. But regardless of the specific dynasty, the office of pharaoh carried immense theological weight. The pharaoh was not a normal king. He was viewed as the incarnate sun god, the son of Ra.
So he's essentially a deity on earth.
Yes, he was the absolute pinnacle of earthly authority, the mediator between the divine realm and the physical world. His word was law. He sustained the cosmic order, which they called Ma'at.
And yet, this incarnate deity is terrified by a dream about cows and stalks of grain.
It's a huge blow to his supposed divinity.
Let's visualize that dream for a second. In ancient Egypt, the entire economy, the entire civilization, depended entirely on the annual inundation of the Nile River.
Right. No flood means no food.
Exactly. If the Nile flooded correctly, you had abundant grain. If it failed to flood, you had famine. So Pharaoh dreams of 7 fat cows coming up out of the Nile, followed by 7 starving, emaciated cows that eat the fat ones.
It's a nightmare of absolute economic collapse.
Yeah. So he calls in his experts, and this is where the secular wisdom of the day completely collapses.
It is a stunning display of divine irony. Pharaoh has at his disposal the collective intellectual, spiritual, and occult elite of the empire. He calls in all the magicians, the Khartoumim, and the wise men of Egypt.
These are the top guys.
The absolute top. These men were trained in oneromancy, which is the interpretation of dreams. They possessed massive ancient dream manuals. They were the smartest, most educated, most spiritually attuned men in the greatest civilization on Earth.
And they fail entirely.
Utterly. Their wisdom is totally bankrupt in the face of divine revelation.
They had an absolute wall. And looking at the application drawn in your notes, it points out the sheer folly of relying on the world's experts to cure a spiritual famine.
Right. We see that constantly today.
We do. Today, our culture looks to secular philosophers, sociologists, and economic theorists to fix the deep existential dread we face. We look to modern magicians to interpret the terrifying signs of the times, but they are completely impotent when it comes to the things of God.
Yeah, and after Joseph interprets the dream and lays out a massive economic survival plan, Pharaoh turns to his servants and says, "Can we find such a one as this, a man in whom the Spirit of God is?"
Wow.
The Hebrew phrase there is Ruach Elohim. The highest authority on earth is forced by the sheer weight of undeniable truth to admit the supremacy of Yahweh.
Wait, I need clarification here because that's massive.
Yeah.
Pharaoh acknowledges the Ruach Elohim, but is he actually adopting an orthodox view of God here?
Ah, good question.
Like, is this a genuine conversion moment where Pharaoh repents? Or is he simply recognizing a superior utility that his own pagan priests lack?
Well, if we connect this to the broader context of ancient Near Eastern religion, Pharaoh is speaking from a polytheistic framework.
Okay, so he's not becoming a monotheist.
No, he does not suddenly become a follower of the covenant God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He recognizes that there is a divine spirit at work in Joseph, a spirit that possesses a wisdom far superior to the local deities of Egypt. What we are witnessing is the doctrine of common grace in action. God's truth is so brilliant that it forces even pagan rulers to acknowledge its superiority. Pharaoh does not have to be a regenerate believer to recognize that Joseph has the only viable answer to the impending crisis.
That highlights a crucial distinction. The truth of God operates with such undeniable force that the secular world has to bow to its practical superiority, even if they hate the God behind it.
Yes.
It shows that true wisdom requires divine revelation. It is vastly superior to all cultural elite consensus. Think about the visual of this scene. The whole royal court, the entire academic and religious establishment of Egypt, has to step aside for a 30-year-old Hebrew who just took a bath and shaved after getting out of a subterranean prison.
It's wild. But recognition without action is useless in a crisis. Because Pharaoh recognizes this unmatched divine wisdom, he must act. He immediately initiates the physical transfer of dominion.
So he gives him the ring, he's in the fine linen, he looks the part. But looking like a ruler in the palace doesn't feed a starving nation.
No, it doesn't.
How did Pharaoh enforce this new authority out in the streets? Because the author of Genesis gives us very specific details about the physical tokens of this new status. Pharaoh gives Joseph his signet ring, clothes him in fine linen, and puts a gold chain around his neck.
We need to dig into the historical context of these items to understand the gravity of the moment. In the ancient Near East, the signet ring was not a decorative piece of jewelry.
Right, it wasn't just for show.
Not at all. It was the physical embodiment of the king's executive legislative authority. Kings used these rings, often pressing them into clay bullae or wax, to seal official state documents and laws.
Okay, well.
By handing over the ring, Pharaoh is transferring the full administrative and executive command of the Egyptian empire to Joseph. Joseph can now draft legislation, seal it with the king's authority, and it cannot be revoked.
So it is the equivalent of handing over the nuclear codes and the supreme command of the military in one single motion.
Spot on. That's a great modern equivalent.
What about the fine linen? The Hebrew word used there is shesh.
Fine linen, or shesh, in Egyptian culture, was reserved exclusively for royalty and high priests. Producing this specific type of flax was incredibly labor-intensive.
So it was a massive luxury item.
Huge. The resulting fabric was dazzlingly white and nearly translucent, symbolizing absolute purity and divine favor. By clothing Joseph in this linen, Pharaoh is instantly elevating his social and religious status to the highest possible tier.
Wow. And the gold chain.
Furthermore, the gold chain is a specific, well-documented historical award known as the Gold of Honor or the Gold of Valor. Historical Egyptian records, like the autobiography of Amos, son of Ebenah, describe this exact award being bestowed directly by the pharaoh upon officials of extraordinary merit.
Okay, so God is not just clearing Joseph's name. He is not just giving him a legal pardon from the false accusation of Potiphar's wife. God is decorating him with the absolute highest honors the known world has to offer.
Exactly. I mean, it's total vindication.
And the sources you provided point out a literary motif here that we cannot miss. Think about the role of clothing in the generations of Jacob.
Yeah, that is a brilliant detail. The Hebrew text structures these family histories using the word toledoth, which means generations or accounts. And within the toledoth of Jacob, the clothing motif is incredibly vivid.
Start from the beginning of Joseph's story.
Well, his ordeal of suffering began when his father gave him the coat of many colors, right? A garment of favor that incited his brother's murderous envy. They violently stripped that garment off him when they threw him in the pit. Later, he leaves his garment in the hands of Potiphar's wife as he flees from her seduction, and she uses that specific garment as false evidence to condemn him. He is then clothed in the rough, filthy rags of a dungeon.
And now, finally, he is clothed in the royal, dazzling linen of Egypt.
Right. What human beings used for deceit, for violence, and for false condemnation, God reverses for public vindication. The very thing that marked his humiliation now marks his absolute triumph.
Your notes compare this to the concept of believer's baptism found in Romans 6. It is like a prisoner having their old, defiled, filthy garments stripped away. You know, the garments of their past life, their sin, their shame.
Yes.
And being clothed in the pure, pristine, dazzling righteousness of Christ. You go down into the water dead, and you come up clothed in royalty.
The physical adornment signifies a total transition of state and status.
But let me ask a critical question here on behalf of the listener, because I can see someone taking this the wrong way.
Okay, what is it?
Does focusing on this physical adornment, you know, the gold chain, the royal linen, the ring, the immediate elevation to massive wealth and authority,
Right.
does this risk creating a prosperity gospel expectation for the modern believer?
Oh, I see.
Like, does this text teach that if we just hold on through the tough times, God guarantees we will become wealthy executives decorated with gold?
The theological analysis in your sources aggressively refutes any prosperity teaching drawn from this text.
Good, because that's a dangerous trap.
It is. The prosperity preacher wants the gold chain without the dungeon. They want the fine linen without the false accusation. They want the signet ring without the 13 years of agonizing silence and enslavement.
Right, they want the crown without the cross.
Exactly. The gold chain only came after a literal dungeon. In the Christian framework, the cross always precedes the crown. Joseph was prepared to handle the gold because the iron of the fetters had already entered his soul.
That's a powerful way to phrase it.
Yeah, if you give the gold of Egypt to a man who has not been broken and humbled in the dungeon, the gold will destroy him.
So the affliction is the absolute prerequisite for the authority. Returning to the narrative, the visual adornment in the court is only the first step. For this massive administrative authority to actually function, to organize the grain storage and preserve life during the coming famine, it must be proclaimed to the streets.
The transition of authority has to go public.
Pharaoh decrees that all people must submit to Joseph. The narrative takes Joseph out of the private throne room and puts him into the second chariot, with royal heralds running ahead of him, crying out to the masses in the streets of the capital.
It's a huge public spectacle.
It is. And I want to look closely at two crucial Hebrew words here, because the original text carries a weight that standard English translations sometimes soften.
Right, the linguistics here are fascinating.
First, let's look at verse 40. Pharaoh says to Joseph, "According unto thy word shall all my people be ruled." But the literal Hebrew root word for be ruled or submit is nashak.
Yes, and the word nashak literally translates to kiss. The literal rendering of the Hebrew syntax is, at your mouth all my people shall kiss.
Which sounds a bit strange to our modern ears.
It does. But in ancient Near Eastern iconography, like the black obelisk of Shalmaneser, kissing the feet, the hem of the garment, or the ring of a monarch, was the ultimate physical demonstration of absolute, terrifying submission and homage.
So this is not a casual nod of agreement or a polite salute.
No, not at all. It is total physical surrender to a sovereign.
It perfectly mirrors the messianic command in Psalm 2.1, "Kiss the Son, lest he be angry, and you perish in the way." It is a demand for absolute allegiance. And then we have the word the heralds cry out as the chariot rolls through the streets. Abrek.
Right. Abrek is a rare Egyptian loanword assimilated into the Hebrew text. Linguists call this a hapax legomenon.
Unpack that term for us real quick.
For those unfamiliar with the term, a hapax legomenon is a word that occurs only once in the entire written record of a language. In this case, the entire Hebrew Bible.
Wow, just once.
Yeah. Because it only appears once, translators have to look at cognate languages, like ancient Egyptian or Akkadian, to determine its precise meaning.
And what's the consensus?
It is widely understood to mean bow the knee or attention. It is a solitary, stark imperative commanding the immediate physical submission of every citizen who saw that chariot. When the herald cried, "Abrek," you dropped your tools, you stopped walking, and you hit the ground.
Man, our modern culture completely despises the idea of absolute submission. We prefer casual autonomy.
Oh, absolutely. We hate being told what to do.
We like to negotiate our obedience based on our personal feelings in the moment. We prefer to give lip service to authority, whether that authority is civil, familial, or divine. But Nashak demands the exact opposite.
It really does.
It demands total physical and spiritual surrender. You do not negotiate with the man in the second chariot. You hit the pavement. But looking at this level of absolute command, where is the boundary? Does Joseph become a Pharaoh himself?
Well, Pharaoh places a very specific limitation on Joseph. He says, "Only in the throne will I be greater than you."
Okay.
Joseph exercises absolute authority, but it is entirely delegated authority. He is acting on behalf of the sovereign. He does not usurp the throne, he executes the will of the throne. This concept of delegated subordinate rule is vital for understanding how God governs the world through appointed mediators.
So he has conquered the public square. The whole nation is bowing the knee. He is now permanently embedded into the fabric of Egyptian society. And Pharaoh solidifies this integration through a new name and a new family.
Right. Pharaoh renames Joseph Zaphanath-Paneah. Egyptologists debate the precise etymology, but the consensus in your research notes translates it to mean the God speaks and he lives, or revealer of secrets.
Which is a massive public concession by Pharaoh. He is publicly validating Joseph's God, or at least Joseph's divine inspiration, in his very name.
Mm-hmm.
And then Pharaoh gives him Asenath to be his wife. She is the daughter of Potiphar, the priest of On.
Now, this is a massive detail. The city of On, which the Greeks later called Heliopolis, was the absolute epicenter of Egyptian sun worship.
So this was the cultural and religious headquarters.
It was the most wealthy and influential religious cult in the nation. The priests of On were the intellectual and spiritual elites of the empire. By giving Joseph the daughter of the high priest of On, Pharaoh is integrating him into the absolute highest echelon of the Egyptian aristocracy.
Wait, if I am looking at this from a distance, this looks like complete and total cultural assimilation.
Yeah, you could definitely read it that way initially.
Joseph takes an Egyptian name, he dresses in Egyptian linen, he shaves his head according to Egyptian custom, and now he is marrying into the family of the chief pagan priest of the sun god, Ra. How does Joseph avoid being swallowed whole by the very pagan culture that is giving him a wife, a title, and immense wealth? How is he not just selling out?
It is a valid concern, but it reveals something incredible about God's sovereign confidence. God is not intimidated by secular empires.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, God places his chosen instrument right in the center of the adversary's religious capital to mock the idols of Egypt. The covenant identity remains entirely secure.
So he doesn't compromise his faith?
Not at all. Joseph does not begin worshiping the sun god.
Yeah.
Later in the Genesis narrative, we see him clearly maintaining his faith in Yahweh, attributing his success to the God of his fathers, and demanding his bones be carried out of Egypt. The Lord owns his people regardless of their geography. God can plant a faithful servant in the darkest, most pagan administration on earth, and that servant will accomplish the divine will without losing his soul.
That brings a massive sense of comfort for anyone listening who works in a hostile corporate environment or a secular academic institution today.
Mm-hmm. You don't have to flee culture to remain faithful.
No, God is not biting his nails hoping you survive the culture. He planted you there to mock the idols of that culture by your quiet, faithful competence and your allegiance to the true king.
Exactly.
Every single historical and cultural detail we've discussed so far, the rejection, the pit, the ring, the submission, the Gentile bride, none of this is random. It all points to a much larger eternal reality.
Yes, it points directly to the ultimate fulfillment, the greater Joseph. Your notes argue that Genesis 41 is a flawless typological portrait of Jesus Christ.
Let's make sure we define that. Typology is not allegory, right?
Right. Typology is the study of historical patterns ordained by God, where an Old Testament figure or event acts as a preview, a shadow of a future reality.
Mm-hmm.
Joseph's life casts a shadow, and Jesus Christ is the solid object casting that shadow. If we read this text and only see a story about a smart administrator surviving an agricultural famine, we have completely missed the core message of the text entirely.
Let's trace those redemptive historical parallels because they're staggering when you line them up side by side.
Okay, consider the sequence. Both Joseph and Jesus were beloved sons of their fathers. Both were sent to their brethren. Both were violently betrayed out of envy.
Yeah. The brothers envied Joseph's dreams and his favored status. The Pharisees and religious leaders envied Christ's authority and popularity among the people.
Exactly. Both were stripped of their garments. Both were sold for the price of a slave and just pieces of silver. Both were numbered with transgressors. Joseph was imprisoned with the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, while Jesus was crucified between two thieves. Both descended into the pit, the grave, and both were elevated from the place of death to the right hand of the supreme ruler.
The parallels just keep compounding the closer you look. But there is a massive difference in scale. While Joseph distributed physical grain to a starving ancient world, Christ offers himself. He is the actual bread of life.
Yes.
How do the sources you provided ensure the reader approaches the Old Testament this way, seeing the Christological typology, rather than treating Joseph as just a moral example of a resilient guy with a good work ethic?
Well, the research roots this reading method in the New Testament itself. In Luke chapter 24, on the road to Emmaus, Jesus tells the disciples that all the scriptures, Moses and the prophets, testify concerning himself.
So Jesus validates this way of reading.
Precisely, the entire Old Testament is pointing toward his redemptive work. We also look at Philippians chapter 2, the great kenosis hymn, which provides the theological key to unlocking Genesis 41.
Remind us what Philippians 2 says.
Philippians says that because Christ humbled himself to the point of death on a cross, God highly exalted him and bestowed on him the name that is above every name, so that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow.
Okay, so the cry of Abrahamic, bow the knee, in the dusty streets of ancient Egypt is actually the prophetic anticipation of the day when every human being, every angel, and every demon will bow the knee to Jesus Christ.
It is a historical dress rehearsal for the final judgment and the cosmic coronation of the Son of God.
Christ fulfills the offices we see previewed in Joseph. Christ is the true prophet who reveals the hidden mysteries of God perfectly. He is the true king who rules over the nations with delegated authority from the Father. And he is the true priest who preserves the lives of his people.
Yes. Recognizing Christ as the ultimate fulfillment allows us to understand the precise timeline of redemptive history we're living in right now, because the sequence of events in Joseph's life actually maps onto the current age of the church and the future of national Israel.
Now, this is fascinating. The dispensational view outlined in your notes lays out a breathtaking sequence. Let's walk through it.
Okay, first, Joseph comes to his Jewish brethren, and he is violently rejected by them. During the time of his rejection, he is hidden from them.
Right.
Where is he? He is exalted among the Gentiles in Egypt, and while he is exalted among the Gentiles, Pharaoh gives him a Gentile bride, Asenath.
Just as Christ came to his own, and his own received him not. And currently, during this era where national Israel has largely rejected the Messiah, Christ is exalted among the Gentile nations.
Yes.
He is calling out a people for his name. He is taking a Gentile bride, the church.
And notice what happens next in the Genesis narrative. Only after the Gentile bride is secured does the terrible 7-year famine strike the land.
Wow.
And that severe trouble drives his Jewish brethren out of their comfort and forces them back to the brother they pierced, the brother they rejected. This results in their weeping, their repentance, and their ultimate reconciliation.
It is an astonishing picture of the tribulation period, the time of Jacob's trouble, which drives national Israel to look upon him whom they have pierced, resulting in the national salvation of Israel described in Romans 11. It is all right there in the structure of the narrative.
It really is.
But looking at the pastoral application in your notes, if we are living in this Gentile bride era, waiting for the culmination of all things, waiting for the famine to end and the king to reveal himself fully, what does this text say to the person listening right now who feels abandoned in their own 13-year dungeon?
That is the big question.
Yeah, what does the text say to the person who feels like the cupbearer has forgotten them, the false accusations are sticking, and the heavens are made of brass?
The theology presented here brings intense pastoral application to that exact pain. The text argues that you must trust the hidden providence of God. The deepest comfort of this theological framework is that God is not making it up as he goes along. Your suffering is not a blind spot in his vision. The narrative demands that you discard the fleshly desire to manipulate your circumstances.
So no scheming your way out.
No. Joseph didn't try to dig his way out of the dungeon. He interpreted the dreams and left the outcome to God. The Lord perfectly times a vindication of his people.
Because if the cupbearer had remembered Joseph immediately, Joseph would have simply been a free slave wandering around the streets of Egypt looking for work.
Right. He had to be forgotten for 2 full years so that he would still be locked in the royal prison at the exact moment Pharaoh had the dream. The delay was the mechanism of his supreme exaltation.
The delay was the mechanism. That is a heavy, glorious truth. It means the waiting is not wasted. God is using the friction of the delay to sharpen the instrument for the task ahead. We have summarized a massive shift here today, moving from the darkness of the subterranean pit to the blazing light of the royal chariot.
Yeah, and the God of Genesis 41, the God who orchestrates the rise and fall of empires, the God who commands the heralds to cry, bow the knee, is the exact same God executing his unchangeable decrees today.
Right. His arm is not shortened. His mind is not clouded by the shifting politics of our modern world. Looking at how these theologians read the text, They do not leave it in the past.
No, the text demands application.
The source material essentially demands a response from the reader, asking you to evaluate your own life. What ideological magicians are you relying on to fix the famine in your own soul? Are you looking to politics, to wealth, to self-help gurus to interpret the terrifying dreams of your life?
And the text suggests they will fail you. They will stand silent when the famine truly hits.
You need the Ruach Elohim. The narrative urges a posture of total surrender. It asks if you are willing to kiss the ring of the greater Joseph, Jesus Christ.
The text calls the reader to submit to the king who holds the bread of life. The storehouses of his grace are infinite, but according to the passage, they are only accessed through the posture of submission.
I have a lingering question for you, based on the notes you provided, something to ponder long after you finish listening today. Think about the hardest thing in your life right now. Think about the darkest corner of your current experience. What if the very affliction you are desperately praying for God to remove is the exact unchangeable instrument He has ordained to position you for your greatest eternal usefulness?
That is the mystery and the majesty of providence.
Until next time, keep digging, keep trusting, and keep looking to the King.